Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Daanish TV's English language channel, the global voice of the Center for Muslim World Studies. And it is our great pleasure and honor today to have one of, put it very bluntly and to make him blush a little bit, one of my intellectual heroes and mentors with us today, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, who I'll say right off the bat, because even despite the fact that many of our viewers may not be too familiar with this tradition, but easily Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali is in the history of Pakistan's leading liberation theologian. I have no doubt about that. And liberation theology is something that I've studied quite extensively. And so this is the man that we have before us today. And you can imagine how excited I am and many of our viewers are to have him on Daanish TV. Someone that I really not only respect immensely for his intellectual contributions, but his role as a public intellectual, his activist commitments, his positions all over the world, from South Africa to the US, in terms of being an academic and an intellectual, but with a profound commitment to social justice and to liberation for peoples all over the world and for the oppressed. So it is our great honor to have you, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, and it's almost a bit strange because I must admit that I have a very close relationship with someone who I affectionately call Charles Uncle. So if I go into that, please, our viewership, don't mind. He is still our distinguished Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, despite me calling him Charles Uncle occasionally. But what I wanted to begin with, just to have those people who shamefully do not know much about both about kind of your own intellectual trajectory and biography within Pakistan and abroad, and how that has led you towards your intellectual and political commitments, and ultimately towards what we call being a liberation theologian. So what I wanted to perhaps start with is to just have you give some reflections on an introduction towards this life trajectory of yours, of how did Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali become Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali with all of his profound and prophetic social commitments?
Well, when I was in Pakistan, I was a young man, and I was active in labor movement as a part of. I came from a educated, upper middle class, bureaucratically trained people. Both my father and my mother were both professionals, and so that was my first commitment. So I started with that commitment towards the rights and the question of expanding democracy. Remember, this is the time of the first military rule that I was growing up in. So that to put this thing. When I went through the British education system that we were all subjected to, whether we were in Britain or we were in Pakistan, didn't matter, because we had learned all our thinking as a primary criteria of success was from the colonial roots. We had learned this as a part that they were successful because they had this knowledge. And if we had to be successful, we had to get this knowledge. It was a part and parcel of our colonization. To quote Frantz Fanon, we may have given up our locational colonialism, but we hadn't given up our intellectual and mental colonialism, and we remain tied to that. And we never developed tools for both the critique of that, and when we did, it was always against a locational and this arrogating pride to ourselves that we have become independent. It was never done as an act of saying, well, there's got to be an epistemological weakness, if I can use that word here, that knowledge based out of a colonial model could not be a knowledge that was generative for the people who were colonized. So we had become what the British call, an all other aspect, Goras, except the color of our skin. So this notion laid behind our knowledge. So when I decided not to continue my graduate work in Britain, and I went to Germany, and I went and studied three things that actually helped me. One was the critique of enlightenment that was beginning to emerge out of Nietzsche and Heidegger. I did philosophy. My first Ph.D. is in philosophy, in contemporary philosophy, as they used to call it. And there you begin to see the epistemological weakness of enlightenment, that enlightenment had led us astray from common sense knowledge. One was the individualizing of knowledge game from the development of first this ego cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. As if to say, because I can think of you, you exist, Junaid. You don't exist as such. So the argument was philosophical, not just that I think, but that because you have come on my horizon, you exist only because you have come on my horizon, and I can think about you. So your existence as such. So to me, that was a fundamental negation of humanity. In the development of this individuality as an individualism as the fundamental. This is this model of Descartes that led us all astray, and we all began to talk about subject and object.
And Dr. Amjad-Ali, I'm really glad that you're coming to this right away, because in some ways you are very familiar of the ability of the power of this whole discourse and narrative around the Enlightenment, of how it has colonized the intelligentsia of many societies, even of the global South, and especially I will go even here in Pakistan. So if you read the English language media, it is just astounding that in some ways they have not engaged the critical work that has been done that you're speaking of now, and they are still kind of caught up in this old tradition versus modernity debate from the 19th and early 20th century. So, I mean, in some ways, you're going down that line, but I really do want you to respond directly. What are these people missing out on? What is the problem with that narrative?
Well, actually, the problem that is that in fact they are philosophically dated. So they are not modern. The postmodernity debate that took place with Heidegger and Gadamer and Ricoeur and all that never took place in our thing, because we got caught up by the English model, which got tied to the British. The certitude, let me put it this way, the certainty of grammar as compared to the uncertainty of the speech event or of a discourse. So that they say we can find the grammar, then we've got the perfection of knowledge. But grammar is only a virtual reality. It only exists and is only workable when you use it. And when you use it with series of prejudices and series of knowledge games. I'm sorry, I'm going too philosophical. I know that. But this is where second point was,
I may love it, but for the viewers,
I know, that's why I said second is that natural science as a model. So let me give you a very, very easy example. H2O is water. You can't do anything to undo that water factor. It's H2O. But that's knowledge which is good for explanation of what water is. But the construction of what the concept of water is a completely different science. Who gets the water is a political science question. To quote King Lear, hark, do you hear the sea? Ripeness is all. I mean, why? There's a whole poetic side to knowledge that is taken out. So this purely natural science modeling of all knowledge reduces everything to a H2O level and forgets that there are a series of other issues. I mean, here in America, we have a Hoover Dam, which feeds actually Arizona. Arizona is a desert, right? They had to so there's more golf courses and swimming pool in Arizona than anywhere else in the world. Because that water was created by the senator who was representing Arizona. So there's a political side to even who gets
Right.
water. And
Right.
that is a question that we face in Pakistan because we have got desert climate almost. So it's not H2O that is important. It is who gets the water, which is actually a changing knowledge game. So in the Greek world, there was three ways of going about the knowledge game. You know, the one was this episteme, this knowledge of the unchanging, the sun will shine tomorrow kind of argument. But the question was, it was not sun, but who was in the light? That's the question. You know,
Right.
who gets the light? Who gets kept in the darkness? Becomes a democratic, political, justice, fairness, all those series of questions.
Right.
But if you reduce everything to natural scientific, so one is this philosophical eye, and the second
Right.
is this certitude of knowledge, so that we never actually experimented with knowledge, which will start saying, you know, what is our traditions, what are our value system that open the door. So in that absence, the fundamentalist Islam took over because it did not allow. So they challenge these things, but they challenge it from an even more conservative position. I mean, that,
Right.
let me put it this way. So Islam has been a dynamic religion. And I say this to you not because but I did, you know, my postdoctoral degree from
Right,
Columbia.
which is important that that you
So
yes, very
I have to
important that
talk
you've
all these
studied
knowledge
Islamic.
games.
Yes, no, it's
So,
I just wanted to tell the viewers that it's very important that you have also been a scholar in Islamic studies.
yeah. So that's what I say. So if you take this notion of H2O,
Yeah.
and apply that to all knowledge game here. The H2O was a knowledge that came from the West, because for West, that was important to unearth that which is given. In
Right.
German, we use the word explanation. It explains reality. But
Right.
what is required of the human community is to understand it. H2O is not an understanding, it's an explanation of what water is. Who gets water depends on your understanding of justice, your
Right.
understanding of fairness, your understanding of democracy, your understanding of participation, your understanding of sustainability.
Right.
Now, you can't
And-
apply H2O on
And these are political questions. Yes,
those are all
Right.
political questions. So to say that I don't do politics, well, you know, yes, you do politics. We all do politics. We are, to quote Aristotle, zoon politikon. We are political animals. But
Right.
the politics we do is a question mark. So again, I'm going to quote to you some of my people who I depend upon, that we are living in a world at hand, not in a generic world. We live in a world at hand. I live with a world of people who mold me. You know, you and I are speaking English because we were born in a certain context.
Right.
Right? Why are we not speaking anything? Because
Right.
we are culturally conditioned, we are socially located, we are
Right.
familiarly contextualized. All these series, we went to different schools. You know, I mean, I've been to British schools, Pakistani schools, American schools, German schools, even French schools. You know, so if you look at all those things, you got different sets of prejudgments. And I'm
Right.
using the word prejudgment consciously because the real word is prejudice.
Right. Right. Right.
And the question
right.
is, how do we undo these prejudices? And I think to
Right.
me, and I'll say this to you, that what happened to me was that I unlearned and I then relearned the knowledge that I was given. And I think somewhere along the line, I had acquired tools to be able to do so. Natural science does not give you those tools. Because it just says, no, you can't change H2O.
Right.
But
Right.
you can ask a question, why is the water of the Indus River going in this particular place and not that particular place?
Right.
That is a question of understanding, so it can change. So why are the poor Haris not getting the water? Why are the canal colonies only feeding the Brahmins, if I can use that old word?
Right.
Our Brahmins. Why is it not
Exactly.
going to the poor? You know, so that is a question not of H2O. It is a question of logic and philosophy and politics and social thought and social justice, ethics.
Yes.
That's not part of H2O.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so that's how I came to the knowledge of it.
Yeah.
And that the other side of that is the understanding of liberation theology. I mean, this is the reason why
that's what I wanted to get to. So where does the theology, the theology and religion, where did that come in Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali's life?
I remain very committed person to justice, and that led me through Marx. So I came to religion through Marx. I mean, people go other way around. I went this way. I came to it because the question of justice, just on the sake of materiality, was not sufficient. Even though I am a highly material person, because I think if material justice is not done, you don't have any other justice that takes place. It's like saying without election, there is no democracy.
Right.
Right. But doesn't mean election is sufficient for democracy, as we are witnessing here in America. It is necessary, but not sufficient.
Not sufficient, right.
That's the same argument that distributive material justice is necessary, but not sufficient. You have to do certain amount of restorative justice, certain amount of retributive justice, certain amount of commutative. You can commute the colonial that you decide to, but they should be held accountable for theft.
Right.
You can't just say, well, they've done it, it's 100 years old. A crime is a crime. It doesn't matter when it happened.
Yeah.
We can't, hello?
Yes.
The picture's gone. Oh, yeah, okay. So I just lay this out that Latin America is seen as and I came to it being at Princeton, not in Latin America. I read this material and I said, no, this is actually sound theology as compared to the theology I was learning about maintenance and restructuring of colonialism.
Right.
In the name of, and the God's name being used in vain, if I can use a biblical message. You should not take the Lord's God's name in vain. And I think Western theology was taking God's name in vain. I mean, which is to say that there was actually not doing the justice for which God has created. Dard dil ke waaste paida kiya insaan ko. I mean, this is the argument that I held close to my heart.
So it was a very colonial mission of Christianity.
Yeah. And also the abstraction of God rather than a participation of God.
Right.
The abstraction of God was God is up in his heaven, everything is fine here. And I said, no. See this, and this is the argument I make with my Muslim and my Christian and my Jewish scholars. If that was sufficient, you did not need to have prophets.
Right.
If the world, if God is in heaven and he's created all of us, and that's the end of that story, is not sufficient.
Right.
Junaid, I've lost your picture.
No, it's okay. I'm here. Don't worry.
Okay. Sorry. I mean, technology still baffles me, but that's me.
Don't worry. I'm always with you, Uncle Charles. Don't worry.
So the materiality of life.
Yeah.
That it is God has given us this world. Let me use the word in a very generic sense. And it's a world that has to be cared for. And I'm using this Heideggerian notion that we should remain caring to it. Besorgen sein. We should be, everybody who comes into our orbit, we should show them care. And I think one of the things that liberation pushed for is that the people who are dislocated and have been disowned and have been dispossessed of all their value and dignity as a human being have to become the criteria of God's love and God's compassion and God's prophetic witnesses over time. And I think that's where I picked up liberation theology. I think Latin American liberation theology, I then later in my evolution found it wanting because it was still very Christocentric. It's very Christian-centered. It had it's Christian grammar. It did not have the ability to deal with other religion and did not have other traditions to pick up the solidarity of other religion as a parcel and part of who should be doing theology. Right. And I think one of the things that African and Asian liberation theologians made, one was with Africa, the cultural side, because they had not that what I call the old established religiosities, which say Islam or a Buddhism or a Hinduism did. But they did not have it. But they then picked up the tradition of this what we used to call animism, based on as a pejorative statement. But the spirits that were around them, the cultural spirits.
Right.
And that they were kept informing them. So it was we have intergenerational responsibilities to each other. Right. I mean, this is that, we look after our grandparents and we look after our children. And that's a dependency structure. So that the middle age provides for parents on top and the children at the bottom, and then
Right.
the next generation moves on. And we do it whether individually, as in Pakistan, we look after our parents, they live with us, or you do it collectively as you do it in the West, whether you have social security system, but there's constantly an intergenerational caring responsibility. And
Right.
I think that becomes much harder for people who are living on poverty line, because they
Yes.
cannot manage to provide for the next. So the growth becomes permanently dislocated and disabled. And my argument is that I'm not looking for fattening, but I am looking for opportunity for all equally.
Right.
So that, my children have good value, but that your child also needs to have good value system. And so that's where I came to this. I'm just this intergenerational morality and the intergenerational ethics on the one side, and the world that we live in are as our responsibility. We dwell in it not as people who are recipient or expecting everything, but one who contribute to the goodness of things around us.
Right.
And I think if we don't do it, then we are failing our duty as human beings, not just, and that doesn't matter what religion you practice. So,
absolutely. Dr. Amjad-Ali, one of the problems that many progressives and liberals find with the whole notion that that theology and the prophetic religion has anything to say in the modern world is that this was supposed to be a phenomena, according to many of the sociologists, the classic Weberian thesis, something that was supposed to just go away, and that it's kind of like a nuisance in the modern world to even raise these issues. And why can't we just have a nice secular discourse on these issues without bringing in any of this theology, religious stuff in it? And in fact, to add to that, when we do bring it in, well, religion will promote hatred, violence, so on, misogyny, all of these things may be true in certain circumstances, but in some ways their narrative is a very totalizing one, that in fact that theology and religion, all of this stuff is just bad. It's bad news and it should be in the dustbin of history. What would your response be to that?
Herbert, let me go back just a little bit. Herbert Spencer was the first one to argue that we are evolving out of religion, right? Yes. So that you have this, and religion is primarily a superstitious factor. That it believes in spirits and ghosts and all those things. So he says, with emergence of science, we will have the reduction of religion space. And he was applying it, and I think good number of modern scholars follow it without knowing that this is a Spencerian route that we are following, and not and I think it's a classical English move, right? I mean,
yes,
it's not European, if I can say. It's very British. And while Britain had a religion of the state, we did not realize, that the Queen was the head of the church, not just the head of the state. And that this was set up in the context of Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, where we think that it led to a secular state, which is not true, actually, just historically inaccurate statement. But because we have given, we sing a lot of false choruses.
Yes.
And we keep repeating them ad nauseum, and not in 1648, as the Treaty of Westphalia gets written, there was a clause put into it, which we don't know. 99% of our Pakistani modernists don't know. It says, "Cuyos regio, huios religio." Whose region, his religion. So if you are a Calvinist, and I'm the Lord of this manor, everybody has to be a Calvinist. If they're not Calvinist, they have to leave.
Right.
If I'm a Catholic, this is Catholic, everybody has to leave. If I'm a Lutheran, those are the three religions at the time of the Treaty of Westphalia, right? I mean, quote unquote, in Europe. So I mean, there was no Islam, even though Islam has been sitting on the door of Christianity in 1306. I mean, with taking over of the Kosovo, the whole Eastern Europe falling apart, and then 1453, Constantinople falls, which is the real head of the Christianity. It falls to the Ottomans.
Right.
And then 1529, the gates of Vienna attack. And Luther, as you know, I've written this with our colleague, that the whole thing is that the Turks were one of the main reasons for the Reformation, because the Turks were threatening the hell out of Europe.
Right.
Yeah, and people just forget that. And the point is, what people don't realize is Christendom is not a Northern European concept. It is a concept that was established in 300 AD, 300s, in Turkey, what is now Turkey. It was Constantinople. It became Constantinople because in 923, the king, just before dying, gets baptized.
Right.
Constantine. And I mean, he gets baptized. वो क्या बोलते थे हम लोग? Pascalian wager. कि अगर मर गया तो कुछ नहीं होगा. मगर अगर खुदा है, so I better become a Christian.
Right.
Right. Hedging all
there is a God, yes.
Because he was a Roman, right? He was a Roman. He believed in the state God, and he himself was one of the gods. So with that came Christendom. It became the religion of the Roman Empire. Roman Empire was not located in Rome. It was located in Constantinople.
Right.
Remember, for Islam, Rum is not Rome as we know in Italy.
Right.
Rome was Constantinople as we know in Turkey.
Right.
Therefore, Monana, Rumi. He never went to Rome. He was born in Constantinople.
Right. Right.
So that whole tradition of falsehoods, that for 800 years, Spain, the most western point of the West, western point. I mean, if you look at the geography on Atlantic coast,
absolutely,
that's the Iberian Peninsula. For 800 years, 711 to 1492, remain under the control of the Muslim, and one form or the other, different parts, different combination of things, and all that. But as soon as 1492 happens, they're trying to pass the corridor of Islam, which has completely blocked the movement of going south to India and China, which was seen as the main trading partner. I mean, there's the reason, one of the reasons why Marco Polo is so famous is because he found a route through Gobi Desert to go to China.
Yes.
Right, in 1290s, right? So otherwise, they couldn't go. So this going across to what is now Americas was a way to go to China. I mean, Christopher Columbus, right till his death in 1517, still believed that he was in India.
He was in India.
And so I always thank the Native American. I said, because you were there, you are our savior. Otherwise, they would have done the same thing they did to you. You know,
right.
So it was a genocide in the name of God, a genocide in the name of colonialism. I mean, something like 65 million people were killed. I mean, this is the heyday of the beginning of the Western social structure. Right? I mean, we know that.
Right.
And, you know, people like Burnell had written on the Black Athena. I mean, I don't know if you've ever...
Yes, of course.
Wonderful piece.
Of course. This is the invention of Europe.
Exactly. Thank you.
The invention of Europe. I mean, the notion that that Greece and all of this was part of the great European civilization. Well, when they discovered that, Greece had some great philosophers that we want to appropriate as part of our great Western civilization, later on Judeo-Christian civilization, and so on. Then they start appropriating and recreating, socially constructing a so-called Europe, an invention of an imagined Europe.
The term Judeo, since you mentioned, the term Judeo-Christian did not exist. The Jews were seen as what Aimé Césaire called the negritude of society.
Yes.
Right? I mean, they were seen as lesser human beings. They could be killed anytime. They could be...
Absolutely.
The Jews were Christ killers.
Yeah.
They were, anytime anything, the plague happened, it happened because they had poisoned the wells.
Right.
Everything was wrong with Jews, right? And so this argument of Judeo-Christian is a pure manghalat, if I can use that word.
And of course, the great reformer Martin Luther, that the entire New York Times and the Western world wants Islam to have a Martin Luther. We know his views on Jews.
On either of them. I mean, if you are interested, I have this article on the Jews and Turks in the Reformation. You know, very pejorative, because his statements, he has real fear of Islam.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he has got a completely negative view. On the other hand, he says, you know, if a Christian monk goes and spends 3 days with Muslims, he will become a Muslim. This is also new thing, sort of. So you've got this two-sidedness, and the Judeo-Christian heritage came out of the guilt of genocide.
Yes, right.
It never existed as such. All of a sudden, the way to undo this genocidal thing was to say that this highly civilized, the highly rational, the highly scientific world had killed 6 million people for the sake of their religion, even though they were claiming themselves secular.
Right. Right.
And that Europe all knew about it. There was not any part of Europe which was not in the knowledge of that.
Right.
And they all participated in that genocide by either, what do we say, by leaving those things that should have been done undone, and actually participating in the actual of doing them.
Right.
Poland. And so all this rational structure, I mean, Germany was a rational society. The most rational society, the founder of Kant and Hegel, all participated in the genocide at the most rational point. And it was not at the point of religion. This is my argument. Why do you not talk about rationality as being evil? Because it produces genocide.
Right.
I mean, how do you talk about it? Was scientifically done. The people were killed very efficiently, very
right. And right.
So why do we not call the science and this reason genocidal when we talk very easily and to take your question that you raised?
Exactly. Whereas it's the narrative about it is the opposite. It's that more enlightenment rationality is the cure, the antidote to so-called the religious and ethnic violence that explodes all over the place. What is required is more secularism, more enlightenment. And this is very unfortunate, because this narrative, not only in Pakistan and of course in the West, but also in many parts of the global South, amongst the intelligentsia, the so-called West-toxicated, or those that have subscribed to the Eurocentric episteme, will make this argument.
Let me again. I was saying, I read in my part of my philosophical development was Nietzsche, Heidegger, and all these people.
Yes, of course.
And then, of course, I was reading Karl Marx and then Hegel as a background, and Feuerbach and all those guys.
Yes.
But where the actual problem comes with is that if you read, and I'm going to give you this so that you understand where this rationality begins. If you read Kant and Hegel, you'll read them as rational people, but you don't get to read always their text on other people.
Right.
And Kant is an incredibly derogatory person. So a lot of people who are saying things against Islam and all that are actually using not the language he used against Islam, but he used against other people. Other people being Indians or Africans or
incredibly
or
racist.
Latin American natives, all those people.
Yes.
And there is actually, people don't realize how pejorative those are. I mean, that he wrote.
Absolutely.
And a man who had never spent more than 5 miles away from his home. He was not there.
Is writing about the Indians, the Africans, and so on.
and I'm talking about universal rationality, the a priori rationality that exists prior to the locational. So that West has that access to it. Nobody else can have access to it. But because West has the a priori Vernunftigkeit, if I can use a German word, which is rationalizing principle. Not just rationality.
Uncle Charles, I actually think this is important to actually mention within the proper interview, what you're speaking to me about right now. Would you agree? I mean, I think these are very important things that you're saying. So I don't want our viewership to be deprived of what you're saying now. So we can pick up on that and then go to what the other issues that I mentioned.
No, but
would that be okay?
That comes to the Native American. My point is, when the Europeans were running away from their persecutions and or their poverty and or the economic depravity, they came to the New World, quote unquote. They call it the New World. It was not a new world. The natives were living there.
Yeah.
So we are celebrating today Thanksgiving, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah.
Because they taught us how to eat turkey and to eat